welcome to Green Shoe Conversations. This is episode 5. I'm Stephany Cochran, and I'm the executive director for Green Shoe Foundation. And if you're not familiar with us, we are a mental health agency, and we offer a 5-day intensive outpatient retreat for adults 21 and older. And today I'm really excited. With me is our clinical director, Miss Teresa Dack. Teresa, how are you doing?
I'm great. How are you today, Stephany?
Good. Thanks for joining me. So I kind of just enjoy our chat. So this is going to be great. The last several weeks, we've really been kind of talking about where we are in today's world. We spent a lot of time kind of focused on what it was like over the last 3, now going into 4 months. Can you believe it?
Yes, I can.
Yes, with this pandemic and how, we can help people really focus on what their new normal is going to be and how to be present, and really spending some time dealing with some mindfulness. Last week was great. We had Kinsey Lyons on with us. She's been a huge supporter of Green Shoe, and she talked a little bit about what it's like in the addiction world right now, and talking how it's kind of been a tale of 2 pandemics. But I wanted to kind of almost go back to the beginning and spend some time and really just talk about the Green Shoe model. And so would you kind of talk and tell people a little bit about our model and kind of what we do?
Certainly. Our model was developed by Pia Mellody, in fact, in the 80s. And so it's been around for a long, long time and has been used in many different facilities with great success for a long time. And the model is called a model of developmental immaturity, and it focuses on childhood relationships and how we learned how to do relationships in healthy and unhealthy ways, and how that impacts us in our current relationships today. So we look back and focus. Pia discovered that there were 5 areas of individuals when we experienced less than nurturing experiences in childhood, trauma of any kind. And that may be just from abandonment or neglect. It doesn't have to be that what we normally think of as the out and out physical, emotional, sexual abuse trauma. Anything less than nurturing in this model, in Pia's model, is considered not healthy. And that created a system and core values that we incorporated in childhood, and they weren't healthy ones. And that evolves around 5 core areas. The first one is our value and our worth, our self-esteem. And the second one is our system of setting boundaries, whether we have walls up or we allow ourselves to be a victim and we're too vulnerable. The third area is in our reality, which means how we think and what we feel and how we act. So our reality. And then the 4th area is our needs and wants, our dependency. When you came into the world as a child, you're totally dependent on your parents or caregivers for taking care of you. And did we learn to become interdependent or to dismiss what we needed or wanted? And then the 5th area is an area of moderation, which so many of us have problems with today in our current life, in living in the healthy middle. We're not to one extreme or the other. All of these core issues have models of extreme. We can either go far right or far left, and neither is healthy. And so in moderation, the example is I use a lot in our retreats is, if you're in a car going 150 miles an hour down the road, that's extreme, and you're not able to have healthy relationships at that. Or if you're stuck on the side of the road and not moving, again, then you're not able to keep walking and having a normal, healthy, functional life. So those are the 5 core areas that Pia created and said, when we have childhood relational trauma and we experience less than nurturing experiences from our parents, then we develop out of healthy range of self-esteem. We either feel better than others or we feel less than, and we don't feel valued. And boundaries. Go ahead.
No, I think that's great. And for me, that was something that was such kind of an aha or eye opener. And this, this model is really grounded in one of her books that she wrote, Facing Codependency. And I remember reading it, and as as, you know, learning the model through you guys with these 5 core issues, knowing that I fit somewhere in it. It wasn't where you would read a model and you're like, well, that doesn't fit for me. With you talked about the polar extremes, it's like a scale. With self-esteem, somewhere I fit on that scale. Moderation, somewhere I fit on that scale. So it fits for me. And I could identify where I wasn't, like you said, exactly in the middle. Part of that time, or, you know, where, you know, those areas were. How do the 5 core issues kind of interact with each other? Are they kind of on their own island, or do they kind of flow back and forth and interact?
No, they interact with one another. And what is so amazing about this model is when you say I fit on one extreme or the other, in different relationships, you can be on one extreme with one person and the very opposite extreme with another person. An example of if someone is employed and they have problems with their boss, they may feel less than their boss, and they let their boss push them around, treat them inappropriately, say unhealthy things, and yet they have a spouse at home, and they go home and they feel better than, and they want to control their spouse. And so they feel like that they have the right to tell them what to do and how to do it. So we have extremes in different relationships. We can be one way with one person and another extreme with another person. And the question you asked, that was kind of a little side note, but the question you asked was, how does it interact? They all interact together, because our self-esteem impacts our needs and wants. Mm-hmm. Our self-esteem impacts our reality, because if we feel less than somebody, then we're not going to feel like sharing about what we're thinking and feeling, because, oh, I can't do that because I'm not as good. They know everything. They don't need to hear what I have to say. Mm-hmm. So every one of these core issues interact with another core issue.
Sure. Talk a little bit about codependency, because again, that was another concept of the model that really mm-hmm. kind of broadened, you know, back in the day, especially when I was going through my master's program, you know, talking about codependency, I had such a narrow view of what that was. And that's not the case at all. It has such a broader reach than what I even thought.
Mm-hmm. Pia's definition of codependence is a relational disorder created by its immaturity, created by relational distress. So, and so what that means is we didn't learn how to be a healthy, functional adult in childhood, and so now our relationships aren't healthy. And so, and because we allow people to mistreat us, or we mistreat other people. We don't get our needs and wants met in healthy ways. We use addictions to solve our problems when we feel sad, or when we are hurting or afraid. What do we do when we feel afraid? So that disorder of immaturity caused by relational trauma means that we act like a child when we're an adult. We're in an adult body, but we have childish behaviors. We yell and scream instead of being able to talk about what we really think and feel in healthy ways. Or we get too enmeshed with individuals, which means we allow what they think and feel to take over who we are. So we're not able to set healthy boundaries. So codependency is really not being able to live in the middle of those 5 core issues. Our self-esteem is one up or one down. We feel better than or less than. We put walls up to protect ourselves, or we're what we call invulnerable, and too vulnerable, and we let other people abuse us. The reality is that we have problems with knowing who we are and being able to express that reality appropriately. We're either out of control or we're shut down. So codependency is really not being able to live in the middle of these 5 core areas, get our needs and wants met in healthy ways, and then live in the middle of, and learn how to be intimate, because we learned how, and intimacy means sharing your thoughts and feelings, knowing who I am and wanting to find out who you are, and having that healthy communication. That's intimacy. So our intimacy, we learned that again in your childhood, in your family. So how were things shared in your family? Were you told what to do? Were you allowed to make decisions? Were you allowed to say, I want this instead of this? So we learned how to do life and relationships in childhood.
Yeah, that is great. One of those core issues I know as a team, we've spent a lot of time talking about, kind of recently, and some of it has been in our previous podcast, but without really calling it a core issue, is boundaries. Because with us feeling a little bit out of sorts, out of routine, we've had to kind of really focus on our personal boundaries and what that is. So, I really wanted you to spend some time today kind of talking about that particular core issue, and
Certainly.
helping define it, what it is, and what are those extremes, the polarities with the
Mm-hmm.
boundaries.
Okay. Boundaries is a system of limit setting. It protects and contains a person. And you think about COVID and all the changes, our boundaries have definitely
Mhm.
changed. I mean, we have been isolated in our homes for a long time. We go out, we wear a mask. That is a boundary. You can't see my face. I mean, because we want to protect ourselves and others. So that's what boundaries are. They protect you and they also contain you. That the mask contains us and it also protects us. So that's exactly what boundaries do. And there's boundaries related to physical boundaries, sexual boundaries, and then Pia even talks a lot about emotional internal boundaries. And that's a harder one to understand, but it's a very important part of codependency is our emotional boundaries. And so when we talk about those and talk about the extremes of boundaries is when you put a wall up between someone. If there's a wall between you and me, we can't have a relationship. And so that prevents that. That is too containing. Because sometimes when we learned as a child, if we didn't feel safe, we had to put that wall up to protect ourselves, but it prevents intimacy. So walls are not healthy. And then the opposite is true is when we don't have any boundaries and when we let someone hit us or let someone yell at us or call us names and not stand up for ourselves and advocate for ourselves, again, that's a boundary violation. And so we're not protecting ourselves. We're not containing ourselves if we're the one that's doing the offense of hitting and yelling, or if you're a parent and your spouse is being emotionally abusive to your child and you don't step in and say, that's not okay. Again, we need to set healthy boundaries because that's how we learned how to do boundaries in childhood is by what we saw exampled by our parents. How they set boundaries for us. Did they protect us from our siblings? Did they protect us from our neighbors or someone that was mistreating us? So we learned how to do boundaries in childhood. And now boundaries are a huge part of our lives to help us, again, to protect us and to set limits.
Mm-hmm. And I know one example that you've talked about too before is the parent that made all the decisions for the child.
Mm-hmm.
And so the child never even learned how to set boundaries or that they were supposed to because a parent always did it for them. And not even realizing that that was, something that they needed to learn. And so as an adult, then they have no idea that they even needed to set a boundary.
And that would be more the internal emotional type boundary. When you have a parent, also if a child does something, which children are going to do, because children are perfectly imperfect, that's one of our core values of a precious child is they're going to make mistakes. But when they make a mistake and a parent disciplines them in an unhealthy way, if they slap them across the face and say, don't ever say that, and the parent says, if you hadn't said that, I wouldn't have slapped you. That's teaching the child that I'm responsible for you hitting me. And it's not accurate. The adult is responsible for their behaviors. So that's a violation of an internal or emotional boundary, and that's not healthy. So then as adults, we didn't learn to stand up for ourselves. We didn't learn to intervene when somebody is saying something that's inappropriate to us. To set healthy boundaries because, oh, I can't do that because that might hurt their feelings. Again, that's a codependent statement that I'm responsible for somebody else's behaviors or feelings or thoughts. No, you're responsible only for your own. That's the internal emotional boundary part of learning how to be a functional adult and be responsible for your own stuff.
I think it's really easy sometimes to identify, and we all know that person, either at a party or even a family member who has no boundaries.
Oh, yes.
I mean, I love my aunt to death, but she walks in the room and everyone, I don't care if she knows you or not, is going to get a hug and a kiss and just hello. But you talk about the other side, the one that puts the walls up.
Yes.
And kind of and thinking about what it's like to be in a relationship with someone who has, too strong of boundaries or those walls up. That's not as easy to recognize.
It may not be as easy to recognize, but when you walk in a room and you see someone that is so angry, and it's like, don't approach me. That is a wall of anger, and we can learn to recognize that. Instead, we maybe grew up with someone like that, so now we're married to someone like that, so we just accept it and not say, because what that does is that prevents anybody from having healthy communication. That prevents intimacy. I don't know what you're thinking, and you don't know what my thinking. I'm assuming, but that, what assuming does.
Right.
And so those walls prevent intimacy. Could be a wall of fear. I'm frozen because of what happened to me in childhood, which created some fearful patterns. And so now my brain, when I'm in a situation, when my boss calls me into the office and I am silent and I can't talk to him, that's about some kind of something that you probably experienced in childhood where you were reprimanded and you felt afraid and not in control. So what goes into that office is not your adult functional self, but it's that codependent child that feels like, oh no, my dad's going to get onto me. That's that same fear that comes up. It's not adult emotions, but those were emotions carried from childhood. And so your boundaries, again, you're going to not be able to set healthy boundaries if you're in that childhood emotional state.
And we learn those from our parents, those that raise us, during our childhood time. So what does that mean for us as adults? Are we able to relearn? I mean, how do I know whether it's learning how to set boundaries or how to let those walls down? What do I do now as an adult?
Absolutely. It can be taught. You can learn how to be a functional adult and set healthy boundaries. It takes practice. It takes awareness. It takes you doing your childhood relational trauma work. It takes you recognizing and identifying what you experienced in childhood. What did my relationships look like in childhood? Were they healthy? If not, looking at them, having those feelings about what comes up for you now as an adult when you think about my mom slapping me, or my mom not being there for me at all when I needed there, or my dad being at work all the time, and when he was home, he was watching TV, so he was never there for me. It takes us looking at looking at what we experienced in childhood, having our feelings, thoughts and feelings about that, and then being able to release some of those past happenstances that we experienced in childhood. And to do that with, sometimes we need a therapist to do that with.
Sure.
And so, but yes, we can learn how to do healthy boundaries when we understand and apply why I put walls up, or why I let people walk all over me, and why I can't say no. If we go back to the original source of how I learned to set boundaries, we can learn to set healthy boundaries today as an adult. It takes practice, but we can do it.
I love how you tell people too that by going back, you're connecting the dots. And that helps bring that awareness, because sometimes, so many people are not aware that they're violating their own boundaries or violating other people's boundaries.
Absolutely. To bring awareness. And when you ask someone, when they have a boundary failure, is what we call it. And we talk about that in our weeks, in our retreats. Well, this happened when my son or my husband or whoever it was said this, and I didn't stand up for myself. And we asked them, when's the first time you ever remember not being able to stand up for yourself? people immediately can think of times, wow, when I was 8 years old and this happened, I wasn't able to stand up for myself. Where did you learn that? What were you experiencing? Well, I was afraid. Well, that child, you are not a child anymore, but we still have those same patterns ingrained in our brains that we learned how to do. So you can retrain our brain, neuroplasticity. I love that.
Uh-huh.
And using Daniel Siegel's discussion about that and how we can change our neural pathways in our brain so that we can change the way we think and the way we feel and the way we behave, which is huge, and which is what we deal with in the retreat, which is so exciting to see changes in the way people care about themselves, the way they can set healthy boundaries, take care of themselves, and the way they do relationships. So yes, people can change.
And I think that's the neatest point. It doesn't matter where you are, what life stage you're in. Yeah, you can absolutely relearn, change, completely do it differently, and have those relationships that you want to have. That's, I think, the exciting part about this.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and about this model that it looks at. This is something that can't be just talked about in a quick 20 minutes, which is so so awesome.
We do hours.
I know, exactly. So it's really about kind of getting down to the nuts and bolts. And I think that's what we'll do next week. Rebecca and Steve are going to join us and just really break it down. Now that we've talked about this, I'm sure people are asking, okay, great, you've talked about all these concepts. How do I really, really do it? And you mentioned, some of those emotions that come up. Sometimes we don't set boundaries out of fear because we're scared, and because of past experiences. And so really kind of examining how that, and maybe give some real specific tools and ideas would be great to do. So yeah, we'll definitely do that next week, and continue kind of our talk on boundaries. So thanks. And again, I miss seeing your face every day. So it's so awesome to kind of hear you talk about all of this. If you guys want more information, make sure you go to our website, greenshoe.org, about the retreat, about the information. You can reach out to us on there, and we will talk to you guys next week. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks. Bye.